I'm so pleased to be able to introduce to you Vicky Angelaki, who is in Sweden, joining us from Sweden. So she joined the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences in January 2020 at Mid, Sweden University. And as professor, she is an interdisciplinary literary scholar with emphasis on theatre studies. Prior to joining her position, she was based in the United Kingdom for 15 years, where she held full-time permanent roles at Birmingham City University. This is how we know each other.
Yeah.
And the University of Birmingham, the University of Reading. And in Sweden, she has also worked at the comparative literature subject at Mälardalen University. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about her work, and then we can start the conversation. So her commitment to interdisciplinarity and internationalism informs all aspects of her work. Her research, teaching, conference organizing, and extensive collaborative network are driven by these principles. And in autumn 2021, she was awarded research funding for the project Performing Interspaces, Social Fluidities in Contemporary Theatre. And the work resulted in the monograph I was mentioning earlier, which is called Staging Interspaces in Contemporary British Theatre, Environment and Fluidity, published by Palgrave Macmillan. And as we were saying, this is an open access book, so you can all enjoy it after we have the talk. And other work that she has published includes well, currently she co-edits the series Adaptation in Theatre and Performance, and that has to date 10 books published, and some of her own books are Martin Crimp's Power Plays, Intertextuality, Sexuality, Desire, Theatre and Environment, and Social and Political Theatre in 21st Century Britain, Staging Crisis. Okay, so we'll leave the introduction there because otherwise I could be here all day. And I would like to start this conversation with Vicky, firstly by thanking you again for joining us today.
Pleasure is all mine. Thanks for having me.
And obviously the first question, as we're going to focus on your latest work, is this idea of interspaces. So can you tell us what you mean by that and why it is important to talk about that today?
Thanks so much. Yeah, absolutely. So interspaces, I hope I'm heard okay. I hope this is okay with the headset. So interspaces for me represent all those underrepresented spaces that I was always very moved by. So both as you know, passenger on trains, as a person living their life as a citizen, but also as a theater scholar, I've been fascinated always by spaces that don't get enough attention. So awkward sites, we might call them, parenthetical spaces, spaces that feel like they're part of a transition towards somewhere else rather than the event in themselves. And I so really wanted to capture what happens when action takes place in precisely those awkward and maybe for some, not for me, for some undesirable sites. So that's the literal aspect of it, I suppose. In terms of the more conceptual aspect, the less tangible aspect, I'm fascinated by the concept of interspace as both referring to a spatial interval and a temporal interval. In other words, a site where change can happen. This is something that materializes in our co-presence in the theater, if the play or the performance event, of course, gives us the right set of circumstances. So I don't think that it's possible constantly. I think that certain conditions have to be met. But I think that in terms of us coming together to experience an event, to be part of something that has the potential to compel changes in our behaviors and the heightened understanding of our agency, that's how I understand the interspace in terms of its more, more conceptual, or we could say less tangible implications. For me, interspace is both space and time, which is why I struggled quite a lot with what I already had in Swedish as the term mellanrum, that implies both space and time, and is one word, to capture what that is in English. So that was probably the hardest part of defining this project.
Okay, thank you. And as I understand from what you say in the book, one of the most important motivations to write about interspaces was the idea of challenging binary thinking. So if you can tell us a little bit more about that. And also, if I may quote something from the book that you say about hybridity, so using the term hybrid in terms of how we use it in relation to technology. So hybrid was the term through which binarism collapsed.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks for the great question. So for me, it really starts many, many years ago. I mean, if I'm totally honest, this is a project that's been in the making for a very long time. But like with all projects, other projects become kind of priorities, and then you want to be in another conversation, but you never leave the thought of wanting to do something really quite extensive and ambitious as this one was for me. But it starts really around 2006 when I properly read Raymond Williams's The Country and the City, which is this remarkable, extraordinary book as far as I'm concerned. So 1973, it's first published, and The Country and the City have this unifying word "and," which for me very much creates a fluidity rather than a separation. So already there, I was completely mesmerized and captivated by what he writes at the very end, which is about opening up the dialogue to new ways of thinking about literature and spatiality, that perceive those two places, the country and the city, those two sides, not as antithetical, but as part of a kind of entanglement always already, and a complementation always already. So I start there to dismantle the binary. As a phenomenologist, which is how I began life as a theater scholar, I learned to think away from binaries quite early, using, of course, and drawing on Merleau-Ponty, more than anything else. And to kind of, the first binary I was really keen to dismantle was the one between political theater and experimental aesthetic avant-garde theater, because the most exciting kind of theater we know can do both. So already there, I was in that position of not accepting binaries, dichotomies as structures, as categories that should determine our thinking. The spatial binary becomes the priority of this book, beginning with pretty much Williams opening the floor to more perspectives that take on his own ideas to think about the country and the city forever unfolding into each other and beyond. So hybridity, we know the hybrid comes into our lives very strongly around 2020 to determine discourses, but also practices in terms of how we live our lives because of the pandemic. But I was really keen to see what happens with the term. So when does it begin? Very long time ago. When does it change meaning? Quite recently. And what can it mean for us in terms of both how we engage with theater and experience it in practice, and in terms of how I suppose a text might be structured in itself to enable intermediate modalities, but also to enable different interpretations. So I was really quite excited about the play as a mutable thing that allows space for us to come in and inhabit it, and rather than communicating a fixed message.
Thank you. I will open to the floor in a moment. Just one more question from me. So you write from a personal perspective, from a scholarly perspective in terms of the impact that the pandemic has had, both on people and on scholarship and on the creation of theatre itself. So again, I'm going to quote something at you. You say that COVID-19, it would appear, had mutated into something of a dramaturg. So can you explain why you think that, and how the pandemic itself affected, in this case, British theatre, which is most of the case studies that you explore?
Absolutely, yeah. So that statement that made it into the book, in fact, I remember precisely how it came to me. I was very well advanced in the writing of this book, and I was doing a paper at a conference, and I I used this phrase, and I saw immediately in the audience a response to that people were writing it down, and I thought there's something there actually. And finally, this thinking was focused in that moment, which is really it was very interesting for me as well. And I thought I want to have that sentence into the book, so I'm particularly pleased Paula, that you're mentioning that specific sentence. And the paper I was doing when that sentence came about was referring to Martin Crimp's remarkable play, Not One of These People. So this is a play, for people that don't know it very well, where the playwright himself, Martin Crimp, is on the stage and is standing on the side, to the side of the stage, and there's a huge screen to the other side of the stage, and it's projecting the faces of algorithmically generated non-persons, because they look like people, but they're not actually real. At the same time, Martin Crimp is speaking the lines of his play, 299 statements, relatively short ones, most of them, and his mouth is mapped onto the mouth of those, let's call them people for the sake of clarity, that are projected on the screen. Martin Crimp wrote this play in a way to make it, in this specific way, to make it viable for staging, because it was very much written in pandemic times. And so it had to be in a way where people, as he himself explains in the essay that goes along with the play, as part of the publicity of the production, which was both a Canada and a London production. So anyway, he explains that the play had to be written in a way that it would be viable, so people could come in different intervals and experience it. Not many people would be involved on the stage. So all those conditions that we had to live with when we were experiencing COVID in real time, but we still had theaters open. So when theaters opened again, and we had to adhere to certain regulations. So, COVID became literally a dramaturg in terms of how this play was written, in the sense that it dictated certain modalities of staging. So then I kind of thought, what else could this mean? And I was thinking, of course, a lot of Lucy Kirkwood's also remarkable play, Rapture, that of course began life, advertised by the Royal Court as part of a very interesting strategy as another play by a supposedly newcomer playwright Dave Davidson, That Is Not Who I Am, that was supposed to be called. So when we came to the theater, we realized we were looking at a play by Lucy Kirkwood called Rapture, as I say. And in that play, you have a couple that begin life together in the kind of early parts of the previous decade. And then as the relationship grows, they find themselves really struggling with an isolation and insulation that becomes all the more severe around pandemic times. So we see all the knock-on effects of that, mental health crisis to go with the climate crisis and all of that. So in a sense, COVID also comes in as a kind of setting a framework, the thematic field of the play, we might say, but also, of course, how the play is staged in terms of, at that point, we're back in the Royal Court, I should say, full theater, no masks, when that play is happening in June 2022. But in terms of how we see screens interjecting with real action and all of that, certainly we realize that we're in another world now in terms of how technologies are integrated into performance. Technology had been there in performance for a very long time, but in terms of the dialogues that are emerging, I suppose, thematically, but also the methodological implications of those dialogues. So how does then technology also find itself into the form of the play? I suppose that's kind of what I mean when I talk about COVID as dramaturg. And then more broadly, any play, I think, that is mentioned in this book, but also any play that predates COVID and deals with states of distance, separation, limbo, suspended temporalities, because we experienced all those things in different ways during COVID, can be read very, very interestingly through the lens of what we know now. In the same way that, of course, from where I'm seated at least, you can't read any play today without thinking about the climate crisis. And in fact, it's our responsibility to think about every play that predates what we today refer to as the climate crisis. We need to kind of go back and read again. So to some extent, the same with COVID. I hope I haven't taken ages to answer this also very interesting question.
Thank you very much. Anybody would like to follow? Otherwise, I could hand over.
Okay, I would like to ask a question. Sorry, let me pop into the screen.
Maybe we
Yeah, okay. Ivan Vravjic, former professor of dramaturgy. So, speak about trying to overcome dualities. In drama, we need the dualities to create conflict. And how to create new stage plays without conflicts, without dualities. We can, show how to overcome dualities, but we need to at least to start from them. Or we can do, especially with the mediated high-tech and digital technology, to illustrate some notions, ideas, and to create a spectacle. But what really moves people is conflict. So how do we deal with this trying to overcome duality in drama?
Thanks very much for this very interesting question. I suppose we're very much on the same page, because what I'm excited about in choosing plays to write about, and I do mostly write about plays, being a very strong fan of the text, is plays that precisely take up conflict in its way as an untenable thing, let's say, as something that needs to happen to move on to another state of better co-presence. So in terms of how this happens, I like plays that facilitate a sense of dialogue. So either this dialogue happens as part of the plot of the play. Let's think, for example, of Duncan Macmillan's excellent play Lungs, that is only dialogue, and the main conflict there is between, not really between the couple that we see on the stage, but between that couple and the greater good. So should we have children and add one more individual and a massive footprint onto the environment or not? And that's the key conflict there. But the exciting thing is that precisely that conflict materializes as part of a dialogue that leads us to the next stage, which is we need to come together as communities in ways that are more empathetic. And the answer is not given to us. Is it less empathetic to be a parent or more empathetic, and vice versa? But in any case, the point I want to make is, no, theater absolutely needs conflicts. I'm not whitewashing anything here, not at all. Plots need conflicts to happen. The exciting plays are the plays that expose the conflict, create a dialogue around it, and then, let's say, allow us as audiences, as citizens, to graduate to a stage where we understand that the way to be with each other and face the crisis that we need to work against is not to be divided, but to stand together in a form of solidarity towards the things that compel the greater level of action and community. And again, I'll bring it back to the climate crisis, which for me really is the be-all and end-all as far as where my own work is pitched. I hope that answers to some extent.
Thank you. And I would like to ask you one more thing, because you work with the interdisciplinary projects and conferences. So it is very hard to gather people who have different really narratives. And even in this conference, we have people from all 5 continents. Yet, and there are different narratives, but we are all scholars. We are at least all polite in a way. So there were no real conflicts. And maybe it's just my impression that we are trying to be polite and to hold a bit and not to go in direct confrontation. So what are possibilities to provoke more direct confrontation and to show all the cards, which is very hard in academia?
Oh my goodness, you ask a really good question. I've been thinking about this quite a lot, especially as my own work in terms of its theoretical framework is much closer to sociology and geography these days than anything else. So my own theoretical frameworks have moved away from, let's call it strictly speaking, theater studies, though we know that theater studies is a discipline characterized by pluralism anyway, and we're very grateful for that, of course. I think to begin to answer your question, which implies really quite considerable thought and more time, I would say the key thing for me is exactly what you're doing there, and I've seen the program of this conference with great interest, which is to create a framework for those different disciplines to come together and learn from each other, and perhaps even clash a little bit in terms of, assumptions or expectations. For me, as a humanities scholar, the key thing is that the humanities and the arts get a seat at the table So when I was on my sabbatical year, the funding that this project received made very generous travel possible. I made sure to attend conferences that were rooted, let's call it, in the earth sciences, and that they were talking about climate transition, climate crisis, alternative modes of energy, because I wanted to hear how the scientists and the political scientists are talking about this. And I was having a very fascinating conversation with someone that was very much a political scientist, and he was absolutely adamant that all of us are equally scientists in those conversations and deserve the same attention. So that was quite an enlightened perspective. I suppose the key thing is that we continue to claim that space for our discourses that are happening in the humanities and in the arts, and locate them even more centrally in dialogues that are originating maybe elsewhere. How do we do that then? The question might be. I really enjoy work that compels the coming together of theater and the natural sciences. That may be a performance lecture, for example, or anything else. Once I worked with a wonderful earth scientist, Ian Fairchild, Professor Ian Fairchild at the University of Birmingham, who wrote a performance lecture drawing on his own research and then delivered that lecture. So it's not only about us writing things for colleagues that will perform them, it's also maybe they choose to communicate their research by using our tools and our practices. In any case, for disciplines to learn from each other and to come together, more events like yours, large-scale, ambitious events, internationalist events, and the more the better. But for that, of course, we need funding. So for me, the way forward in terms of the funding structures of the future is very much something structural that enables the coming together of bids that will allow scientists in the earth science community, in the natural science community, in the political science community to collaborate with scientists in the arts, humanities, literatures community. And I hope I've answered again to some extent, to the best of my capacity for today, at least.
Yes, thank you. This was very nice, uniting discipline idea. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your questions.
So, yes, please.
Hi, my name is Yush. If I saw the title of your book without having you heard speaking, so staging interspaces in contemporary British theatre, I would bet this book deals either with the work of directors as in staging or designers as in spaces. But then I hear you say, I'm mostly dedicated to the dramatic text, or I like writing about texts. Can you talk more about your writing methods, in the sense, how does that space or interspaces play out in the work of a dramatist?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a kind of double question. I'll try to remember the second part as I kind of go immediately into the first part. When I say I write about text, I mean that the case studies I choose tend to be plays, because at the end of the day, we're all subjects here, and what moves each of us is different. I am moved by a play very much. I'm moved by text. I still have quite strong visceral reactions to text when I go back to it and open it and I read it again, right? Nonetheless, I'm trained in a way. So when I did my PhD, when hundreds of years ago, but also when I studied, I'm trained in a way. And even though I began in the literature department before I transitioned to a drama and theater department, where I immediately think of the text as something that, if it hasn't been staged, will be staged, can be staged, should be, ought to be staged, or has been staged in any case. So I never write about text alone. I find that conversation quite dry and one-sided. And I am a theater scholar, and that excites me precisely because theater has a life. If we're writing about playwriting, playwriting has a life on the page and on the stage, and those lives are equally important. I write about contemporary theater quite a lot, but my fascination is also with playwrights that go further back, so 19th century and so on. And why those playwrights are still exciting and alive is because their plays change all the time beyond what we see on the page. So if I see And Ibsen, the way I saw an extraordinary production of An Enemy of the People, for example, a few years ago, today it will look very different from what people saw in Norway or anywhere back when the plays were written. So the point I want to make is absolutely, yes, I'm moved by text. I choose to write most about plays than anything else, but those plays always in production, and I always draw on production really, really heavily, precisely because the work that you mentioned, directors, designers, sound technicians, but also kind of anything that we call design on the stage, right? So scenographers, light designers, sound designers, all of them create a landscape of the play, just as at the same time we have a text that also creates a landscape of the play. This landscape is co-created and co-inhabited. It's not singular, it's multiple. So yes, a lot of text, but I think those of us that write about plays know this. Our work would be very limited if we were not talking about productions. And that's why the one transgression climate-wise that I have learned to at least forgive myself partially for is going to see productions when I know that they're completely necessary for something that I'll be writing about. Otherwise, I don't feel that I have done due diligence. So in terms of then, I think I remember your other question, but please correct me if I don't. In terms of how the text itself creates the interspace, and in terms of how the text itself creates space for interpretation, I think some plays more than others. I'm really drawn to plays that do not define their visual fields strictly for us and allow themselves as structures to be inhabited by the spectator, by the director, by the set designer or scenographer, and that their worlds would change on each production, or at least, you know, on every other production. So we're not seeing a thing that is static, that is meant to be staged only one way forever, but we're seeing something that will look very different depending on who is directing it, where it is done, what funding structures are available, and so on and so forth. I like sticking with examples. I'll use again Duncan Macmillan's remarkable play Lungs. No, what does he say broadly? This no sound, no music, no mime, no costume changes, no lighting changes. He doesn't say no bicycles. Katie Mitchell comes in, stages that play in the way that she did at the Schaubühne Berlin, creates a climate theater paradigm. That's the stuff that really moves me at the end of the day.
Thank you.
I'm just asking if it's possible to turn the camera so that you can see the audience.
Samo da se ne prekine signal, pošto hoćemo.
Because there are a lot of people here who kind of
Yeah.
like to see us. Yeah, we can hear you. So,
And a beautiful carpet also.
Viki, I have a question for you. I'm Alexander Bujevic, professor.
Hi, very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Viki. So we talked a lot here about digital this, digital that, but you have something that says post-digital. So what is post-digital in relationship to digital?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Thank you once more. In fact, I was really fascinated by how this kind of tends to create dialogue. When I was talking about the book a couple of days ago in the seminar of my home department in Sweden, and I answered the same question in Swedish, which was a lot of fun. It's you know, it's not easier to answer it in English, but I will try. Very important for me to say the post, I am using it temporarily without meaning that we have, you know, dealt with it and classified it and moved past it, but in terms of what we might call as a major moment having occurred. So I'm really referring to, you know, when I talk about the post-digital, the digital having become a very integrated part, an integral part of everything we do in our lives, the way we live our lives, interact with each other, interact with the arts. And that amazing term that Latham and Sasson developed already in 2005 that I'm using in the book, quite a lot, socio-digitization. That's really what I'm talking about. So that we have graduated to this stage, a shift has occurred that has marked a departure from how we were living our lives previously. So it's not about the entrance of something anymore. It's about this entrance has happened. It has been dramatic. It has delivered a lot of great things and a lot of more questionable things. And so we're at the point where we now are starting maybe slowly to have some critical distance that we might begin to evaluate what has happened, and what will continue maybe to happen can be anticipated with a bit more sobriety, lucidity, rather than strictly, let's say, theorizing, imagining, because we have more data now than we did before. And my answer is somewhere there. But certainly I don't mean that the moment has passed in the sense that we've understood precisely what has happened. We are in the process of understanding what has happened after the watershed moment has taken shape in quite an observable way, is what I would probably best.
Thank you. Were you there for Lev Manovic yesterday? No.
No, I wasn't. I'm sorry. It's been a remarkable week for me. Sorry. Sorry.
No, it wasn't in that sense. I was just saying that Lev Manovic was actually talking in a very similar way.
Right.
They are using post, but he was actually describing this kind of phenomenon of we are entering a new phase.
Right. Oh, this is fascinating to me. I would love, if there is a record, I would really love to see it. I haven't had 1 minute this week of free time. Please know this.
We're planning to capture those keynotes and the main talks, like such as yours, on YouTube.
Lovely, lovely.
So
I'm really grateful.
Everything on YouTube, so you can follow that.
And of course, many more people that I'm sure will be very interested in the remarkable program that you've curated. And I'm really looking forward to that. And again, please forgive me that I'm not able to be there. I won't say it again, to be there with you physically. I would have really liked it, but it's not possible this week for me. So look forward to catching up in a way with what has happened. You're in this moment together and I'm not, and I'm really sorry about that.
Any questions? Some more questions?
Well, we have started from a placeless, the promotion of the book, and now the last event here is actually about interspaces. So, in your work, did you also study drama or theater that is happening not in a stage place, but in some interspace, which is being produced and performed in interspaces?
So we're talking about theater that happens outside of institutional spaces. Is that the question?
Yes.
Yeah. So I try as much as possible to seek out those moments. You know, I still think that something that, let's call it playwriting, let's call it institutional spaces or institutions that commission playwriting, need to work away from, or in any case deal with, is that commissioning a play doesn't by default mean it has to be staged within 4 walls. So because my research is, as I say, quite focused on writing about performances that involve a form of text, I find that text tends mostly to be staged within 4 walls. I welcome more and more occasions, especially because I'm Greek, right? I am Greek, and that theater was staged in open spaces. So that's the paradigm I begin with anyway, that the play belongs to a greater universe, a larger atmosphere. For me, that's totally normal. That's my conditioning. So I don't understand how necessarily we've gotten to a point where the default setting of a text has become the kind of closed structure of any theater space that's a building. Nonetheless, one example that I really wish I had seen. My excellent colleague at the University of Galway, we don't work together. I mean, he's a theatre scholar. Patrick Lonergan writes about this remarkable production, from what I've understood. Corca Dorcas production of Far Away by Carol Churchill, that took place precisely off the coast of Cork, in an island context, and Far Away by Carol Churchill, those of us that write a lot about 21st century theatre environment refer to it as a proto-environmental play. So the play has a plot, the play has characters, Churchill is a genius, and the play in the hands of a really great director, a really great company, can become, I think, can inhabit a whole other level. Korkadorka takes the play outside the four walls, transports the audience as part of the performance through the water to Fort Mitchell on Spike Island. And then what happens there is that, as Patrick writes about, and I have drawn on his work a lot in trying to construct the context of the play in production. So what Patrick writes about is how the soundscape of the site blends in with the soundscape of the play. Things that we think are natural sounds may in fact be the flight that's coming from Heathrow about to land into Cork, and in any case far away, that already incorporates so many levels within it. Spatial levels, interpretive levels, becomes even more amplified. So super excited to see more of that happening. At the same time, I firmly believe that in the hands of an enlightened and exciting artistic director and company, and of course, when there is funding involved that can make this possible, a play can be staged in an institutional space, and the institutional space can be made to feel open and exciting and alive. Milo Rao's Antigone in the Amazon, which I saw at Dramaten, Sweden's Royal National Theatre, some weeks ago, showed us very much that the institutional place can become wild and unpredictable. And I'm also really excited about things like that, possibilities like that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, I think a huge applause for Vicky.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. It's been a very enriching conversation for me. I really appreciate it. Thanks for your kindness in inviting me this evening to be with you.
Thank you for coming and sharing your exciting thoughts. And I'm sure we'll get your book, because it's very interesting, especially as you said, we started with placeless and we finished with interspace. We're finding there's quite a lot of convergence actually in these concepts. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciated it. Thank you, really.
Thank you.
Thank you.